Welcome to noise11.com. Tim Finn and Andy White. Do we call it or AT?
This is our first interview together like this, and so we don't really know. It's going to be up to you.
That's a big question. That's a really hard question.
Yeah. Well, it was 28 years ago when you did the album with Liam, and I guess we all referred to it as alt then, didn't we? So
yeah, and in America we were ALT because it was more kind of
alt in Germany, maybe.
Yeah, it means lots of things. Alt also means everything in Scandinavia, which I didn't know before.
Okay.
It's being called everything. So
we did toy with the idea, Paul, of using the @ symbol as a record cover, but it was Sebastian, Andy's son, dissuaded us, didn't he? He said
he did, because if you hashtag @ it's impossible. Well, it's just impossible. It's like a spelling mistake. It's like @ it's not going to work. It's just not going to happen.
It would have been kind of neat though.
I know.
Yeah, you have to think of all those things these days.
I think it should be @ because it's sort of amusing to hear people say, ask us a question about @ rather than AT. I think it's, so let's call it @
It's where it's at. Where it's at.
It could have been alt again, I guess, but Liam opted out. But he sort of is responsible in some way for the title of the first song on the album, "The Sea Holds the Memory."
A fan sent a message which had a photo of the page of an interview Liam had done where he discussed when he and I first met in Dunleary, which is just outside Dublin. It's the port where the ships come in from England, and there's a bathing place, a gentleman's bathing place, but it's really famous now because I don't know if you've seen a series called Bad Sisters. Have you seen that on Apple TV?
I've heard of it, yeah.
It's brilliant, and they all meet there. That's where they meet, and it's where Tim and I and Liam met. And what was the phrase? He actually used that phrase, Tim, didn't he? He just said,
"Sea holds the memory." Yeah, he was asked about it, and he probably couldn't remember much, so he just said, "The sea holds the memory." But it felt more like he'd put a seal on it. It was a precious kind of time and memory, and so you say, "Well, the sea holds the memory," and it was so haunting and poetic. And off we went. I sent Andy some ideas, and we just started writing straight away, and writing for that, in a way, writing for those memories, for that nostalgia, and for them, and friendship. And then that grew into other themes that followed. But it really did start from there, and it was effortless. It was very fast, and the whole thing was really quick. It was spread out over several months, but whenever we got to it and did a night's work, it would happen very fast, and then we'd sit on it for a while.
Yeah, before we've been having a few years off, you've been very prolific, both of you, haven't you? Andy, you've had The Gardener's Only Temporary last year. Tim, a couple of albums popped out over the last couple of years with Phil Manzanera. So, you must have gone from those projects straight into this.
Well, in the middle of it all, like this one actually started, it preceded my other stuff. We started writing pre-COVID, so it must have been 2019.
That was
and no idea what was about to happen, but we just started sending files. And the great thing is that I've only got literally my studio is one Neumann, is it 87? I think they call it
40. I think your one's the really good one, Tim. It's a 47. Tim's got like the best microphone ever made.
Can you see that?
That's wow.
Right. It's like a 40.
I used a 9-year-old GarageBand. And once people stop laughing, they actually sort of start looking respectful, because it's actually good technology, the old GarageBand. But it's so old. But I can still export high quality WAV files, and so and Andy's a bit more au fait, and so I would send him a vocal, acoustic guitar, maybe a bit of piano, this one here, and that's really was it. And then Andy would start putting really beautiful bass. You've got a precision, right, Andy?
Yeah, I've got a precision, and then
I wish I had a precision. I'm going to get
a Hofner like one, which is probably on the shelf behind Paul there. And yeah, I've got a load of stuff. And Tim recorded drums on a couple of mics, I think. That was really good.
Yeah, I used the
So was it
Neumann room mic, and then I've got an actual really good mic for the bass drum, one of those little egg-shaped ones. But that was it. And then I saw a photo of who's that famous producer that worked with the Stones and wrote a book?
Oh, Glyn Johns.
Yes.
He's got the best clothes in Get Back, which is pretty difficult. It's pretty high bar.
And at one stage, George Martin, and there's another famous English producer who worked with the Pretenders and the Sex Pistols and
Chris Thomas.
Yes, the three of them were in the control room together with the Beatles.
Wow.
Talk about a concentration of genius,
Yeah.
But anyway, I saw a photo of Glyn Johns' drum setup, and it was very similar. He had just had 2 mics. I thought,
2 mics. Wow, that's incredible. Okay.
From the old days,
Yeah.
But anyway, we digress, Paul. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we started leaving we left gaps for Liam, I remember, in the very first track. And then he gave us his blessing. He just said home recording wasn't just something he wasn't.
His actual quote was, "I always fall at the first hurdle."
Yeah.
It's a shame, really, because I would have too. I mean, I'm useless, but I just persevered. I actually got a friend had a son who was about 18, and I got him to show me how to use GarageBand. It sounds so pitiful now that I wouldn't have just had a go, but I was so daunted. This is quite a few years ago.
Good idea.
Yeah.
And
well, you're both working with a legend on this record from the production perspective in John Leckie, who's he's worked with everybody, including Paul McCartney, John Lennon, and George Harrison.
Yeah, well, he was just starting at that time. That clip that Tim's talking about, like he would have been working at Abbey Road then, and I've known him for years. He's like a personal friend as well as a sort of mentor. He's been my recording mentor always since Tim and I met him in Real World Studios after a WOMAD show that Alt did. We recorded a track.
Yeah.
In Real World, and John loved it, and we just struck up a great friendship. And I think I was booked in to do something to record. John and I've always wanted to record one set of my songs in a really good studio, and we had planned some time, and then I just wrote to Tim and said, well, I think it was the time everything was changing and COVID was arriving, saying, why don't we change it? Why don't we just ask John to mix the record? And Tim was really positive about it. We met online, and that's how the mixing process started, because I knew I couldn't do it. I could record it, but I couldn't.
He was so good. I mean, because we really gave him a lot of tracks to work with, and he never complained or never said anything. He never said, oh, perhaps I should thin this out a bit, guys. Whatever we gave him, he would mix. And it partially helped me to expiate some guilt, because Split Enz turned him down on an album. He came and visited us. We were rehearsing in a place in Wales in 1970, I think 78. And John turned up, lovely guy. We liked him. And, he was basically pitching for the job, and we turned him down and went with this fool from America who was absolutely hopeless. And I sort of thought, why didn't we work with John Leckie? So it was lovely to reconnect, and thankfully he didn't seem to hold a grudge. Well, why would he?
No, but he'd probably, Tim, been secretly going, you know what? I'm better than that. I'm going to get it. And he did.
I'm going to rub his face in it.
Yeah, totally. It was really he's really competitive. Yeah.
You might have to listen very closely to this album and see if he's left anything, a little Easter egg in there for you.
That's a coded message, yeah.
Well, Tim's right, Paul. I mean, we gave them all the ideas, and I thought maybe he'd do that American thing where they take nearly everything, nearly every beautiful idea you've had, and they just take it out. But he didn't. He just, his philosophy is the more ideas you have, the better, and they're all valid, and we're going to use them all. And
will that make it difficult for you to perform the album live then?
It'd be impossible. We would need an 8-piece band, to get close.
And an orchestra.
String section, yeah. But having laughed and said that, I mean, we both like to do it, but we'd do it as just a stripped back thing, it would be fun.
I love the sequencing of the album. I mean, it's got a real flow from beginning to end as well. Very consistent.
That's good. I mean, Andy, you probably had more to do with that than me, the final flow.
Yeah, well, it's difficult to go past the order in which we wrote them. So it was actually difficult to go from that to what the album order actually is now. I mean, that was the basis of it, because Tim and I were writing in a flow, and there was some kind of story being told. So it's like just adjusting that, really. But I'm really glad you've said that, Paul, because that's one of the things which is, it's just the most important thing ever. And thankfully Adele has got the shuffle button taken away from Spotify, because you spend a long time with the order of tracks and records. Did you know that, Tim? That Spotify's default was to shuffle the order of a track, so that when you played an album, it played it in any order possible. And Adele, of all people, about 2 years ago, I mean, it had to be somebody huge to ask for them to remove that thing, and they did, so that you actually hear the order which you've taken ages to work out.
Oh, so they didn't just apply that to her stuff. That's everyone now.
No, that's forever. She changed it for everybody, which is great.
Amazing, yeah. Good for
Amazing,
them.
because if you have tracks which segue into each other, which I think we've got one like that on this record. I mean, that is not going to happen when it's shuffled. It's going to be just a random kind of thing. So yeah, I'm really glad you said that, Paul. I mean, we shifted some of the tracks up, like my Regeneration, I remember, was later, but we wanted to get it going. Like, there's nothing could stop the Sea Holds the Memory being track one, because it's just the start of the story. But then my Regeneration coming in second, I think it's good.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the song The Happiness Index, which has quite a fun video to go along with it.
It was the king of Bhutan, who's a Buddhist country, and Buddhists are, it's funny, in an age of diversity and inclusivity, well, especially diversity, that the Buddhists are always looking for the sameness, the great sameness, they sometimes refer to it. And the way they find that is by saying, well, everybody wants to be happy. And even an ant, in his own ant-like way, wants to be happy. And so that, it seems very childlike and simplistic, but it's actually a lovely way to think of it. And so we all want to be happy. And the king of Bhutan decided he would look at his own people, and self-examine his country and see how happy they were. But then it grew from there to being this kind of international index of happiness, and which I don't think any politician takes very seriously, because it threatens everything that they stand for usually. Are we actually happy? Well, no, not really. But they would rather we didn't tell them that. And it's not their fault, but they could probably do a lot more about it. But happiness comes from within and all that. So we all have to work on ourselves. But yeah, I mean, it's just seemed very tragic that Chad, a country in Africa, was declared the unhappiest place on earth. There's probably people there who are perfectly happy with very little. And then there'll be a lot that were miserable, of course, in extreme misery and hardship. But then Finland came out on top, and those Scandinavian countries always do very well. I think New Zealand's in the top 10. I think Australia is hovering just outside the top 10, which makes everybody in New Zealand even happier.
And Ireland was down at 16, Andy.
What? Who can tell?
What about Sarah Stewart? How did you get involved with Sarah in this? She's quite a well-known UK actress.
Yeah, Sarah's wonderful.
She's fantastic.
Yeah, I know. She did in the video. It's brilliant, because Tim probably didn't stress out about it, but I was like, oh my God, what are we going to do? And Sarah just did Tim actually did amazing lip sync for his take, and Sarah's the same. She did all these reactions, like totally pro. And she did it I asked her on Friday, and she did it on Saturday and sent it that night. But Sarah, I met in Belfast when she was acting in a play with my sister. And I've known her ever since.
I like how your two voices blend on the songs. When you can just go from one to the other and back again, right throughout this album. It's just seamless, isn't it?
Oh, great! That's great you say that, Paul. Yeah, well, we were doing it obviously in our own little rooms, but we were connected by this kind of wellspring of memory, and it was we were both feeling it, I think, during the whole time, you know, because it really was a magical time that in the 90s, you know, and this is not like two older guys kind of lamenting. It's more like two older guys rejoicing in those memories. And it just gave a purity, I think, to the sound of it. It wasn't an effort, you know, we were singing it. I think I probably only usually do one take or, you know, maybe a couple, but and Andy was the one who did a bit more of the hard graft in terms of stacking harmonies up occasionally. But yeah, swapping verses. There was very little actual two-part harmony. There is some, but a lot of it was that trading verses and choruses. One of us would sing either or. And it worked with the storytelling in a song like Regeneration really well, because Andy was doing the verses and I would do the choruses. And the chorus was almost like a reflection on the verse, you know, so there was a kind of a natural swap going on there in a narrative sense. And yeah, throughout, really, we just followed our instincts about it. We didn't sit around plotting it out or anything.
Yeah, and there was we'd done quite a lot of that with Alt, where one of us would write a verse about whatever I decided to fly. I would sing a verse and then Liam would tell his part of the story and then Tim would do his, and there were three perspectives and then we'd sing together in harmony. And yeah, we kind of followed that. Like Tim says, it was like a conversation, and it was really exciting. Like in the studio, like I've been in the studio with Sinead O'Connor and she sings, and it's really exciting, Paul, like when she starts singing. And getting files from Tim, like I just put them on and be excited to hear Tim's vocal. And the kind of way he writes melodies is so beautiful. Like it's so unusual and different from the way I do. That kind of contrast was really beautiful as well.
In response to that, the storytelling aspect of Andy's lyric writing really inspired me. And so in Bundle of Dreams, where he was singing about his parents, he sent that to me and I responded with some memories of my parents. And I haven't done a lot of that over the years. I've done a little bit, but this was really inviting. And I hadn't thought about the fact that when we were kids, we used to jump into bed with them, not all the time, but occasionally we'd get into bed in the morning and literally they would have, because they both came off farms and they had very humble kind of backgrounds, they would literally eat bread with butter and have a cup of tea. And, you know, it was unthinkable, like to just have bread and butter. Like, who would do that? You know, you'd always put jam on it or Marmite or, you know, something. But they were very happy just having bread and butter. And that memory came back to me and I was thrilled, you know, and just very moved by it, because Dad was very sick. And in fact, he died during the making of this record. He was 97. And so it was sad, but it wasn't, you know, too sad because he'd had a wonderful life. And, you know, that when we made the first record, Alt record with Liam's dad had died just prior to the making of that. So, you know, kind of that was a strange coincidence, and it enhanced, I think, the emotional connections and the memories. You know,
the album ends with "Rock and Roll Star." Is there a story behind that song, and you know who it's about?
I think we were sort of having a fantasy about writing a musical at that point. You know, the writing was going so well. Let's do a musical.
Sometimes it shifts at the end of a writing process. You suddenly see what the next one will be. So Tim and I maybe got excited about that.
Yeah. And so we went and just created this character. And, you know, he was 52 and he'd had a fairly good run, but he'd never really cracked it. I think, you know, I always think of that film that Bill Nighy was in. What was that film called?
Oh, Love Actually.
The band gets back. Yeah. And the way he stands in front of the mirror in that film and goes, yeah, you know, just getting himself G'd up because he's the lead singer, you know. There's a lead singer thing. It's like, yeah. And it's again, it comes up in Almost Famous too, that whole idea of a lead singer, you know. And so it's a wonderful character to play with. He's got a sports car that only goes 40, and he fancies this woman whose daughter is very suspicious of him, and et cetera, you know. He's not a failure, but he's got this aura of not quite about him, which is really attractive, I think. I always like people who didn't make it quite. I think there's something really appealing about them, not in a pitying way. But they're like warriors that got defeated, because you always hear about the guy that wins in the battle, but what about the guy that lost, Anyway.
Well, guys, good to talk to you. A great album that we've got to talk about too, and a bit of a surprise. I wasn't expecting this one popping up, but here you are after 28 years back together again.
Thanks, Paul. No, we're so pleased you're positive with it, and thanks for your support.
Yeah.